Hello, welcome back to the Oberheim OB-Xa tutorial. Today we're dealing with part 2 of our examination of modulation. Part 1 came a fair bit earlier when we were looking at the main synth, the original synth, but Arturia have implemented their own modulation matrix, or modulation options I should say, and we get to them from the advanced page. If I click on advanced, it brings this up and down. You can also click at the top of the keyboard and it does the same thing. We've got 4 slots, and these are called functions, and we can assign basically anything to anything. Let's be a little bit more specific. This is how we turn them on or off. And so I'm going to choose good old oscillator frequency, because why wouldn't I? Now what we've got in this functions page, we're going to deal with these two screens separately. We're just dealing with the functions panel at the moment. We have the ability to increase or decrease this value, the oscillator 1 frequency, over this period of time by this much. So this is a 16 point, you can have up to 16 points on this graph, and I'm simply left clicking somewhere in this window. If I right click on any of these nodes, I delete them again. And so now if I press a key, that's what happens to the pitch, and it happens by this much. If I increase this value, and if I decrease the value, it inverts everything and my brain melts out of my ears. Why anybody would want to do that to themselves, I just don't understand. Essentially, we start at 0 and we get to decide what happens with this thing. If I draw below the line, that's how I would intuitively expect to have a value go down. I wouldn't draw a line going up and then have a negative value, but you know, knock yourselves out. Obviously, it's for the case of where you've got multiple effects operating, you know, contrary to each other. I understand it, but no thanks, not for me. So this is our pitch modulation. Each one of these lines is capable of being individually edited by hovering over the little arrow buttons in the middle, and when I click and drag that, I can make curves. Let's have a look at these options in the menu at the top. It's a little bit difficult to demonstrate key trig with poly on. I'm going to turn poly off just for now, and then this is the easiest way for me to talk about this button. Key trig specifies what happens when you press a key. So if I press a key lots of times, you can see it's beginning the drawing of the shape every time. Doesn't matter how far along it is, it drags it back. Turn key trigger off, that's no longer the case. Now, the way the situation becomes more complex when poly is engaged is that poly assigns an independent function, this graph, the function, the envelope if you like, to each one of the voices in the synthesizer. So if you've got 8 voices, each one of them has the ability to have its own shape. And what this gives us is the ability to press a chord out of time, like an arpeggio, and have each note of that chord do its own thing. They're all travelling at different rates. It's a bit of a cacophony, but you get the idea. If I turn poly off, then all notes of the chord follow the same function, the same envelope if you like. Loop is very self-explanatory, that's the thing that's allowing it to continue. If I turn loop off, it's going to do this basically once, just like a traditional envelope, and then it sticks at the end of the envelope as if that's its sustain point. Now, the start and end points of these functions are actually fixed. All of the other nodes can be moved, but it always starts and ends with 0. Total length, also very self-explanatory. At the moment it's set to bar because we're in sync. Turn sync off and we can specify the length of the function in time. Let's have it nice and quick. Down below we can see how many points we've got in the function, and if I click in any of the nodes, it updates and allows me to click and drag the value rather than using the graph if I want to do it that way. Select a new node, blah, blah. And then we've got various presets here. We can throw all of this away. If I click any of these buttons, it just basically draws that preset shape. I think by default it starts off looking like that and you get the simplest shapes, but there's plenty to choose from. Get some really, interesting effects right out of the gate with these presets, and then you can pick them up and edit them to your heart's content. There's nothing special about them. It's just a starting point. Next, let's have a look at the modulation matrix. So we have 5 fixed values that we can assign modulations to. Here we've got velocity, key tracking, aftertouch, modulation wheel, and filter envelope. The last one's slightly weird. That's a throwback to the old synth. There was a filter envelope setting on that. It was actually hardwired to oscillate a pitch, if I remember rightly, but now we can map it to anything we want. So out of the box, this is the default preset, and we've already got vibrato depth mapped to our modulation wheel. A little bit of just turn my modulation wheel all the way up there and back down again. If I increase this value, it's going to be more intense. Let's have a look at what options are available to us. This is our matrix destination. So same kind of thing, choose oscillator 1 frequency because that's what we do. Let's get rid of that. Double click, and instead we'll choose velocity. So now the harder I hit the key, the higher the pitch. So I'll just mash C2 harder and harder. It's about as light as I can play it. Increase the velocity, and obviously that range will be wider. Key tracking centers around C3. So C3 sounds like that, and you can see, doesn't matter what I set key tracking to, the tuning is always absolutely stable. But every other note is basically going to be like offset according to this amount. The further away from C3 I get, this modulation amount is going to increase the value of the modulation that's being applied to the particular effect. So here we're talking about pitch. So if I play C2 and then change this value, that's an audible representation of me doing that. Aftertouch is pretty straightforward. Your keyboard may or may not have aftertouch. If I press a key lightly, there's no aftertouch there. We're hearing C2. If I press into the key, there it is. Mod wheel we've already seen, and filter envelope, obviously. Whatever your filter envelope is, in addition to doing what it's doing on the filter, you can also map it to anything you want. And here we, oscillator frequency, pretty straightforward. Pretty standard fare. Modulation matrices appear in most modern synths, but it's nice to have these additional options, these flexible options on top of the stuff, particularly with the original modulation section. It's very constrained, there's only a very limited number of things you can do with it. So it's nice that Arturia have added this functionality, and if you want to stay completely faithful to the original instrument, absolutely fine, you can do that too. I've just had a quick glance back at the user manual. It's oscillator 2 frequency that filter envelope used to be mapped to. So if you're fully into the authentic experience, that's how to do it. That's the modulation page dealt with. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, please consider subscribing, hit the like button. Helps me out with all this YouTube stuff. Thanks very much.